Right, we now come to the urgent question. Luke Pollard.
To ask the Secretary of State for Defence if he will make a statement on ARAP eligibility for Afghan Special Forces.
Minister.
Mr Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to update the House on developments relating to the Afghan Relocations and Assistance Policy Scheme and to answer the specific question the Honourable Gentleman raises in relation to former members of Commando Force 333 and Afghan Territorial Force 444. I know many colleagues across the House are passionate advocates for applicants to the ARAP scheme, whether they serve shoulder to shoulder with them in Afghanistan or through representing them and their family members as residents in their constituencies. We owe a debt of gratitude to those brave individuals who serve for, with or alongside our armed forces in support of the UK mission in Afghanistan. Defence is determined to honour the commitments we made under the ARAP scheme. That is why we have robust checks in place and regularly review processes and procedures. While many former members of the Afghan specialist units have been found eligible under ARAP and are safely relocated to the UK with their families, a recent review of processes around eligibility decisions demonstrated instances of inconsistent application of the ARAP criteria in certain cases. This issue relates to a tranche of applications from former members of Afghan specialist units, which includes members of CF 333 and ATF 444, known as the Triples. Having identified this issue through internal processes, we must now take necessary steps to ensure the criteria are applied appropriately to all these individuals. As such, I can confirm that the MOD will undertake a reassessment of all eligibility decisions made for applications with credible claims of links to the Afghan specialist units. This reassessment will be done by a team independent of the one that made the initial eligibility decisions on these applications. They will review each case thoroughly and individually. A written ministerial statement to this effect was tabled this morning, and I commend it to colleagues. A further Dear Colleague letter will follow by close tomorrow. Mr Speaker, it is the case, however, that ARAP applications from this cohort present a unique set of challenges in terms of eligibility decision-making. Some served in their units over 2 decades ago, some while the Afghan state apparatus was still in its infancy or yet to come into existence altogether. It is also the case that they did report directly into the government of Afghanistan, meaning that we do not hold comprehensive employment or payment records in the same way that we do for other applicants. I fully understand the depth of feeling ARAP evokes across this place and beyond. I thank members across the House for their ongoing advocacy and support for ARAP. We have that same depth of feeling in the MOD and in government, and we will now work quickly to make sure that these decisions are reviewed and cases and decisions changed if that is necessary.
Shadow Minister Luke.
Thank you, Mr Speaker, for granting this urgent question today. The Triples, Afghan Special Forces trained and funded by the UK, are some of the top targets for Taliban reprisals. Around 200 Triples face imminent deportation from Pakistan to Afghanistan. At least 6 members of the Triples are reported to have been murdered by the Taliban since the withdrawal from Kabul. Ministers have allowed media speculation to build for almost a week before setting out their plan to Parliament today that the government would U-turn and look again at these applications. The Minister highlighted inconsistencies in processing these applications, failures, flaws. How was that allowed to happen on his watch? How long will these reviews take, and what new information will be factored in? Tragically, today's decision could be too late for many. Does the Minister know how many of the Triples who are wrongly denied support have already been deported to Afghanistan, tortured or killed? And what conversations has the Minister had with Pakistan to halt deportations of those who now could be granted sanctuary? There's no time to waste. The least the Triples deserve is clarity over ARAP policy. But for months, a public spat has played out between the Veterans Minister and the Armed Forces Minister. We should all remember that the people who matter here are those Afghans who have been left in limbo, fearing for their lives and for their futures. That is why clarity matters. Britain's moral duty to assist Afghans is felt most fiercely by those UK forces who served alongside them, many of whom sit on both sides of this House. British personnel who have offered references to former Triples say they were never even contacted by the MOD. Many of their ARAP applications were denied. Will basic errors like this happen again and be reviewed properly? Mr. Speaker, the British public do not understand why Afghan special forces who served and fought alongside our troops, who are eligible for safety, have not yet received sanctuary here. Will the Minister now sort this out?
Mr. Speaker, look, I think that the honourable gentleman who I know has been advocating for cases himself and is as passionate about this as anybody will feel aggrieved. So too will many colleagues around the House. And Mr. Speaker, the responsibility of any minister is to own any failure of process that happens in their department, and I accept that responsibility. The reality is that these are very difficult decisions to make. The honourable gentleman in his question said that they were funded by the UK government. Well, that is not entirely accurate. They were funded as a donor alongside many other donors into the government of Afghanistan, and the government of Afghanistan funded the units. But as he will well know from colleagues on his own benches who commanded units that work closely with the Triples, there were top-up payments made in order to generate loyalty and to frankly avoid the Triples being poached by other coalition partners who had similar forces of their own. But those records of those top-up payments were very ad hoc, and Mr. Speaker, I take my responsibilities for accuracy to the House very seriously, and I can tell the honourable gentleman in all seriousness that we have looked for employment records, and there are none of those ad hoc records of additional payments available to us. We've spoken to colleagues who have experienced this in the House and beyond to ask for any records that they have. But even then, a lot of the records that come forward are those put together by charities advocating for the Triples rather than contemporary records of those top-up payments themselves. But, Mr. Speaker, the reality is that whatever the challenges have been, some of the decisions were made in a way that was inconsistent, and that is why they must be reviewed. We will aim to get the review done as quickly as possible. We anticipate it will take around 12 weeks, and before that we obviously need to put in place the people who will do the review, who are independent of everything that has gone before. In the first instance, it's a review of the robustness of the question of the decision itself, but where we find reviews of decisions that aren't robust, we will of course seek new information both from the applicant and from colleagues in the House who have advocated for those applicants. The Shadow Minister makes some good points about what this means for people who are in Pakistan. It's impossible to say who's been deported of those who were not already in the pipeline as approved applicants. We don't track that, so I can't answer that specific question. But of course, we will alert the government of Pakistan to those who are included within the review so that they can enjoy the same protection from deportation as those who have already been approved and are awaiting their onward movement to the UK. Mr. Speaker, the Shadow Minister necessarily, that's the nature of this, points to politics and an alleged disagreement on these benches. I can tell him that I'm simply not motivated by those things. The reality is that we're trying our best to bring as many people to the UK from Afghanistan as possible. Some decisions are relatively straightforward because we hold the employment records, others are far more complicated. And whilst undoubtedly there have been some decisions made that are not robust and need to be reviewed, I want to put on record that those who have been involved in making those decisions across the MOD have been working their hardest and doing their best, and I stand up for their service and for what they've done, and I take responsibility for their shortcomings.
David Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been approached by people who are involved in training these soldiers, the 333, 444 and BOST 170 as well. And they tell me that they're the most loyal, bravest and most effective soldiers that were in operation in Afghanistan. As a result, they're the ones the Taliban feared the most, which is, I guess, why the Taliban has been executing them in front of their own families whenever they can catch them. The Minister quite rightly says that we owe them a debt of gratitude. This is more than that, it's a debt of honour. And so can we make sure, both in terms of the administration he's carried out, but also in terms of our relationship with Pakistan, that we do everything to deliver on that debt of honour as quickly as possible?
Mr. Speaker, we certainly will. I think it's an important point to mention that the government of Pakistan has often been the subject of questions in relation to ARAP in these sessions over the last year or so. In my experience, the government of Pakistan has been incredibly cooperative, and we're hugely grateful to them for that. The limit on the speed of flow is not any problem with the government of Pakistan. It is the challenge of getting people out of Afghanistan. And the reality is that no matter how many decisions review, no matter how many additional people we therefore add into the scheme as eligible, there is a limit on how fast we can move people over the border of Afghanistan into Pakistan, and it will take time.
SNP spokesperson Chris Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Shadow Minister for securing this urgent question? A couple of questions for the Minister, if I can, Mr. Speaker. The latest numbers from the Department show that 11,684 people have been granted entry to the UK, but 6,377 have been given indefinite leave. So can I ask what has happened to the remaining individuals? Are they still waiting on a decision? Has any been ejected? If he could give us that, because make the points as others have, those being targeted by the Taliban cannot wait. He indicated to the Shadow Minister that there would be discussions with Pakistan that were about to happen, but can I ask him what actual discussions have taken place with Pakistan? Because there is a real concern that we all have that Pakistan are ejecting people. And finally, Mr. Speaker, what considerations in line with the Refugee Convention and the fear of persecution due to a qualifying factor, i.e. their ethnicity, religion or political beliefs, has the MOD made regarding its compatibility with the Afghan scheme?
Mr. Speaker, to take his last point first, the MOD is not considering asylum claims. Those are a separate matter for the Home Office. The MOD is considering the claims of people who claim to have served alongside the UK Armed Forces. So whilst I don't doubt the seriousness of the issue that he raises around the rights of asylum, the MOD makes no decisions in that regard, because that's not the part of the immigration policy that we have any responsibility for. In terms of indefinite leave to remain, I'll need to write to him with the detail, because my understanding of the immigration status of those approved to come to the UK under ARAP is that they have immediately, they are citizens effectively, in that they have the right to immediately come here, live and work. And so there is no further immigration phase required after their arrival, because their visa to come, having been approved, affords them all of the rights that indefinite leave affords them in the first place. But I'd like to write to him to confirm that my understanding is correct and that he hasn't picked up something that I wasn't aware of. And on Pakistan, I refer him to my earlier answer. I genuinely could not wish for better engagement from the Pakistan government with our High Commissioner in Islamabad, and indeed I'm grateful to the Pakistani High Commissioner to London, who has similarly made himself available to me whenever I've needed to speak to them. The issue with people in Pakistan is challenging, because they have a very large cohort of people that they regard to be illegal migrants that they are seeking to deal with. That is their sovereign choice as a nation. It's not for us to tell them that they must not. But where we have been able to tell them that people are part of our scheme, they have been protected from deportation, and for that we're very grateful indeed.
Bob Blackman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And further to my right honourable friend's question, clearly we owe these individuals a debt of honour. What assessment has he made of the numbers of people that are actually affected, how many families there are, and indeed what the Ministry of Defence is doing to reach out to the families of these brave men and women to actually ensure they can actually come here, as they should have the right to do so?
Mr. Speaker, we think there's around 2,000 decisions that need to be looked at again. Some of them will be entirely the right decision. They just weren't written up and documented particularly well. So difficult to say at this particular moment how many of the cases that we will review will indeed require further scrutiny. What I can say to him is that once we've made that initial review of the robustness of the decisions that were taken, we will of course notify people that if their case is up for review and additional information may be required. And whilst I will set out the detail of this in the Dear Colleague that follows, my expectation is that we will also reach out at that point to any colleague in the House who has advocated on that case so that they are aware that it's up for review and can similarly put forward whatever evidence they have.
Dan Jones.
Thank you, Speaker. I'm grateful to the Minister for meeting with me recently to discuss this. But given the unique nature of the relationship between UK forces and the Triples, and given the commitments that have been made previously, it is beyond bewildering that we haven't got to this point sooner. Now, the Minister spoke about instances of inconsistent application of ARAP criteria in certain cases, and the Minister has said that he takes responsibility for this. But can he give an assurance today that he will work at pace to put this right? And what does the Minister think that this will mean for our reputation internationally? Will people trust us in the future?
Well, Mr Speaker, I'm grateful for the constructive engagement that the Honourable Gentleman has had with the Department since the evacuation from Kabul happened in the first place. And our meeting the other day was most instructive, and much of what he said actually caused us to reflect in the way that we have, and he should take much credit for that. We are working at pace. He has my assurance that we will continue to work at pace, but we have been all along. This is an incredibly difficult process that is consuming ever larger amounts of horsepower within the department, and rightly so, because we owe these people a debt. However, and this has come up in defence questions previously, I do think that we have to be careful not to set the expectation that everywhere that the UK Armed Forces operate now and in the future brings with it the expectation of partner forces that there is an immigration angle to their partnering of our force. So I accept that this is reputationally damaging to the MOD, accept the dent it has on my reputation too. That's right, that's ministerial accountability. But I just push back gently on the idea that this will impact on the willingness of partner forces to work with us, because I don't think it helpful if partner forces think that the reward for working with us is a visa. That doesn't work at all.
Christine Jardine.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker, and I appreciate the Minister's comments today and his commitments. But it's more than 2 years since the chaos with the collapse of the operation in Afghanistan, and this surely has come much too late. We also know that there are still so many people in other areas, not just the Triples, but interpreters, people who worked alongside the forces, who are trapped in countries which are hostile and are threatening them with transportation back to Afghanistan. So can he commit today, with some urgency, ensuring that all cases are looked at quickly, speedily, and we get as many people into safety as possible?
So, Mr Speaker, the cases are being looked at urgently, and actually in the wider ARAP cohort that she describes, that process has been much easier, and I directed the excellent officials who work on this some time ago to, instead of working through the pile of applications, to go to the employment records that we hold for interpreters and other locally employed civilians, and to focus on finding them within the pile of applications rather than going through all the applications that might be spurious or less credible. And we'll do so as quickly as we can. But it takes time, and even once eligibility decisions have been taken, if people are undocumented, and many of the ARAP cohort are, it is incredibly challenging to get them out of Afghanistan and into a safe country, and that limits our rate of flow enormously. She also raises those who are in other third countries. Of course, we do all that we can through the excellent staff in our embassies and high commissions to facilitate their movement out of those countries. But there are some countries that people in with whom we have quite challenging diplomatic relationships, particularly at the moment, and that makes that particularly difficult. Doesn't mean that we don't keep trying. I'm very grateful to our ambassadors and high commissioners for their efforts, but fundamentally they are in sovereign countries and we cannot tell them what to do.
Matt Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in September, the Minister for Veterans Affairs told this House there was something like 1,000 Afghans who were accessing homelessness support, and that was after the government evicted 8,000 Afghans, including ARAP personnel, from UK hotels. Could the Minister confirm that there are still 1,000 Afghans accessing homelessness support?
Good question.
I'll need to write to him on that.
Other Dorrans.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and good morning. Mr. Speaker, due to the high number of former Afghani soldiers whose lives are at risk as long as they remain in Afghanistan, what conversations has the Minister had with Cabinet colleagues on the possibility of additional safe routes to the United Kingdom?
Well, Mr. Speaker, these things are discussed regularly, as the honourable gentleman would imagine. There is an additional route to the United Kingdom in ACRS. Indeed, our offer to Afghan citizens who either served alongside our armed forces or worked alongside our diplomatic missions, or who were simply prominent in Afghan government and society and to whom we therefore feel relocation is necessary for their protection, ARAP and ACRS covers them all up until a point. The ARAP and the ACRS schemes are matched not quite in their generosity, but in their scope by schemes in many, many other countries that were a part of the NATO force in Afghanistan and or part of the wider donor community for Afghanistan. So the opportunities for people to leave Afghanistan and resettle elsewhere are enormous. I think we should be proud of the UK schemes. Today's announcement notwithstanding, they are incredibly generous, and we're moving at the best pace that we can to move people out of a country where it's very difficult to move them.
Alistair Stratton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the honourable member couldn't have put it better when he talks about the debt of honour we owe all of those who served with our armed forces in Afghanistan. And I'm sure members on all sides of the House will be appalled at the fact that years later the situation is still not completely resolved. The Minister rightly highlighted the challenges around lack of documentation in some cases, but given that for these individuals obtaining documentation will often mean applying to a Taliban-controlled passport office, could the Minister talk about how he and the Government are working to ensure that those affected have a route to get the necessary documentation in a safe and efficient manner?
Madam Deputy Speaker, good morning. No, I'm not going to share that detail with the House because it's in absolutely nobody's interest for the Taliban to know how we're doing that.
Jim Shannon. Deputy Speaker, and I think happy birthday is in accordance for you. If you're like me, Madam Deputy Speaker, you don't count the years, you just make the years count. You know.
Charmer, eh? The old charmer.
Can I thank the Minister very much for those very positive answers? The reason why I asked this question to the Minister is simply because I met a gentleman in Pakistan about 12 months ago on this issue. He worked for the British Army, and his job was working alongside those in Special Forces. So this today, Minister, is wonderful news. That Special Forces in Afghanistan will have their applications reviewed, and I welcome it completely. But I would yet again highlight the need to do the right thing by others, as well as those who put their lives on the line in Afghanistan, to be a part of the rebuild effort, and who have found themselves hiding away out of sight in Pakistan, for example, because they are not yet safe. And I would ask the Minister if consideration could be given to reviews of applications for interpreters and those who provided sustained assistance to our forces and who live life in darkness and in fear. Thank you.
So, Madam Deputy Speaker, as I said in response to earlier questions, actually the interpreters and those who worked alongside us in a supporting function are much easier to find within the pile of applications because we have the employment records and we're able, therefore, to confirm their service very easily. If the honourable gentleman would like to write me about the specific cases that he has had raised with him, I'll of course endeavour to get him answers as quickly as I can.
Thank you. That concludes proceedings on the urgent question, and we will now proceed